Our last discussion of the day examines the diverging futures of the Western Balkans, a region where uncertainty, great power competition, and competing visions collide. Moderating is Sabina Lange, Director of Think Europe. Sabina, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sophia, and thank you for the organizers for organizing this panel and for putting it at the end of the day. This means that ours will be the conversation at the reception, but we have to get there first. A generation of a shrinking size has come to an age during the fog of delayed enlargement promises. 18 to 20 years is a generation size. Now, the question is, how big is the risk that the fog of delayed promises turns into friction? What drives the pursuit of alternative futures? Is there a serious alternative, or is just another delay in the future as such, and maybe an empty future? Can the EU, and in particular, I think we need to talk more about the member states, step up to deliver, as we heard several times today, step up to deliver on the promise of Thessaloniki 2003. Let me answer these questions, or attempt to answer, and launch that reception debate with my wonderful panel. So let me invite the panelists, and please welcome them. We will illuminating on these questions with Kenneth Morrison, Professor of History, Director of the Institute of Global Challenges and Cultures at the Montfort University. Welcome, Kenneth. Frauke Seebass, Associate Fellow at the German think tank DGAP, based in Brussels, and a member of the BiEPAG network. Welcome. Zlatko Vujovic, President of the Governing Board of the Center for Monitoring and the Associate Professor at the University of Montenegro. Welcome, Zlatko. And our last panelist is Marjan Šarec, member of the European Parliament and a standing rapporteur of the European Parliament for Montenegro, and if I may add, former Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Slovenia. I'm saying this because these experiences will come handy in our next 45 minutes. So instead of a steady progress delivering on the 2003 Thessaloniki promise, I think uncertainty over accession has dominated, as I said before, a generation, but let's just say too long. At the same time, social and economic reforms that were supposed to and are supposed to bring about better living standards for people in the region have taken a snail pace and given an argument to the president that we heard before and showed how closely related the accession path and the reforms are. And thirdly, competing influences from third parties started to suggest that this another way is possible. Some type of another way, and no longer there's just one possible future. Let me put some numbers at you, and then I'll turn to the panel. Very often quoted numbers, but rarely put together lately. In the latest special Eurobarometer on enlargement, 83% of Montenegrins expressed support or trust in the EU. We've heard of this high number before, and this is contrasted to only 37% of the Serbian interviewees did so. At the same time, in the regular spring standard Eurobarometer, 72% of Spaniards and 69% of Lithuanians supported enlargement, but only 41% of Czechs and French did. The Austrians and Germans with 42 are just 1% over. Now, this is not just a difference in opinion, right? This is an idea of a diverging orientation. And in some cases of the member states, I'm afraid it's also a difference or a disparity between the political class, the elites, and the public opinion. And this will feed into our discussion. Let me start with Professor Morrison. the diverging futures that we're witnessing are suggesting that the external pressure is not enough. For 3 years, we've seen the revival of the enlargement agenda, and we have a camp that thinks this should be enough for both sides, for the EU to do something and for the candidates to push for reforms. The Enlargement Commissioner, Marta Koos, said several times that there are no discounts. The geopolitical card will not be sufficient. So how comes it's not sufficient? What our forces are at play that do not allow for this one European future?
Thank you. And let me begin by saying what a pleasure it is for me to be here at the To Be Secure Forum in Budva. I'm a long-time friend of Montenegro. I've spent a long time in the country. I wrote my PhD thesis on Montenegrin politics between the period 1997, which was a pivotal year for Montenegro because of the split within the Democratic Party of Socialists, all the way through to independence in 2006. So I really did witness this country on its steps towards where it finds itself today. I suppose as a historian, one thing that's worth mentioning, and that all of you know, but it's not always understood very well, certainly in Western Europe and in the United States, is that every time that there's been periods of very significant geopolitical flux. So in the 20th century, we can think of 3 pivotal moments: 1914, 1939, or in the case of this region, 1941. And then, of course, the end of the Cold War. With all of those huge geopolitical shifts at that time, this region has always been exposed to danger. And there have always been problems emanating from those large geopolitical shifts, or the shifting tectonic plates. In a sense, it's no different today, because this region remains relatively vulnerable. I'm personally a huge supporter of European Union accession for all the countries of the Western Balkans. I just spent half an hour with a group of young people from across the region who are very European in their orientation and their outlook. It's where they belong. It's an unfinished project, and I think it's one that we need to attempt to finish. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the underlying trends that exist, the negative trends that still exist in the region. And a lot of this can be explained by divergent foreign policies. And I'm going to use 2 countries to explain those divergent foreign policies, Montenegro and Serbia. If you look at the trajectory of Montenegro since its independence in 2006, it made Euro-Atlantic integration absolutely pivotal to its future. Its whole foreign policy agenda was centered around NATO membership and then EU accession, EU membership. In Serbia, you see a very different state of affairs. So most of you will know that Serbia's position is one of relative neutrality, in which they don't want to commit for historical reasons to join NATO. But that neutrality, sitting on 2 chairs, the policy of Alexander Vujovic, has created space within Serbia for other actors to operate, primarily, of course, Russia and China. So Russian influence, and that's something that we have been speaking about today, Chinese influence is somewhat different in the sense that it takes a very different form. It's normally in the form of loans or infrastructural projects or so-called debt diplomacy. Russia exercises its influence in the region in different ways, in much subtler ways in many respects. One of the channels that's used is essentially through soft power or softer power. We know that Serbia, for example, is the only country in the region that still allows Russia Today, Sputnik. They're quite widely watched in Serbia. It has shaped, to some extent, the perception that some young Serbs have of Serbia's position in the region. And Serbia's position in the region is absolutely pivotal. I want to say one more thing, and we can pick this up hopefully in the Q&As. For me, I think the biggest challenge that exists in the region today is trust. It's trust that young people have in democratic institutions, in political elites, even in the EU accession process. because they've been in the waiting room for a very, very long time. And I've been to many of these conferences where it's 2022, 2025, 2028, 2030. And there's this sense that they're constantly in the waiting room and EU accession is not going to happen anytime soon. That trust or lack of trust in institutions, be it domestic or international, is, I think, one of the biggest challenges we face today. And we've seen an early manifestation of this in Serbia over the last year with the student protests. The young came out in large numbers in the streets because, in a sense, they had nothing to lose. The older generations didn't come out onto the streets. They may have supported the protests, but didn't come out on the streets for the very reason that they're trapped within the system of clientelism and patronage that exists in Serbia. So expressing yourself in such a way can cost you your livelihood. That issue of trust, I think, is key going forward in terms of creating stability or ensuring stability in the region.
Thank you, Kenneth. We'll return to trust, I'm sure, with Zlatko. But first, over to you, Marjan. You're very well placed as an MEP to watch the alignment of the futures and the shared understanding of the future of the region in Brussels, in some capitals, and in the region. Is there such an alignment? Or are also within the Brussels institutions and Brussels politics, in particular in a very difficult European Parliament, do you see there different ideas and visions of the future?
Well, in the Balkans, even the past is uncertain, so it's no wonder that we don't know how the future will go. But since at the beginning you mentioned my experiences, I was present at the European Council when we took the decision in 2019 that the negotiations with Northern Macedonia won't start. So I think there was a big mistake, and Macedonia stagnated since then. It was quite a front runner then. So we have to be aware that we mustn't repeat this mistake that we did with Northern Macedonia. So yes, it's quite a diversion between European Parliament, between European Commission, and between member states, of course. And this process of Montenegro, which I'm dealing with, it depends also on the member states. We always emphasize the preparedness of Montenegro and Albania, but we forget that the process will end with the ratification in all the members. So I think we have to be aware that this is a process which will take a lot of effort to persuade. In some states there will be referendums also, or might be. So we have to do more on this unity, because we all agree that European Union needs Montenegro and Albania or new members as much as they need us, because European Union, strategically speaking, today is on very weak foundations here. We are not the player as we should be and we could be, and enlargement process is the essence of our being. So my experience says that we are too much discussing about how to discuss, basically, and we forget to deliver. And Northern Macedonia was the case that did their homework, or at least a lot of it, and didn't get anything. So let that be a lesson learned in the future, that we must do everything what is in our power to make this process, to deliver this process to the citizens of Montenegro or Albania, or in the future any other country. But yes, things are very complicated and it's difficult to explain in a few minutes.
We'll come back. Thank you. Zlatko. Late German President Walter Scheel said, my translation, it's not a role of a politician to do the popular thing. It's a role of a politician to do the right thing and make it popular. We'll come back to this when it comes to President Macron. But how do you see the relationship between the public opinion and the political processes and elites in the region? Is there a relationship on the support of for enlargement and what the politics actually does in the region? And does it cross the borders? Do countries' differing progress affect the politicians and the people?
I think that your quote that you quoted is referring to the difference between the statesman and the regular politician, those who are shaping, who are ready to fight and to, through debate, to get support for the ideas in which they believe, even that they are conflicting sometimes with the general public opinion at that moment. But what we are facing right now, it's something much more dangerous. It's not the debate of arguments. It's more like, I'm talking about the Western Balkans, is that some political centers, they believe in that idea that they should use the media in their interest. But buying those media, controlling those media, and shaping the public opinion in their favor. And this is something that is happening now in the region when we are talking now about the president of Serbia, Mr. Vujovic, who is controlling the most of the media and buying through different kind of the combination. In Montenegro now, when we are talking about who is owning the media, we can say about national broadcaster, public broadcaster, the national frequencies that all media except one are owned by individuals or the companies from Serbia. They are not all controlled by Vujovic, which is good. But we can say that this is actually now producing what we were referring before, that the public opinion is shaped by the foreign actors. In that way, you can influence domestic politicians. Right now in Montenegro, we have a huge number of politicians, but not many statesmen. I would say it's very difficult to find at least one. This kind of politicians are easy to influence by the public opinion. Maybe you are familiar with the situation, negotiation between Croatia and Montenegro, this conflict that started, provoked by some Montenegrin politician. So what I noticed is that the target was the Croatian politician in order to provoke them, maybe to block the process with European integration Montenegro. But I believe this hasn't succeeded, but the other target is now Croatian public opinion. How to influence, radicalize the Croatian public opinion in order to influence the policymakers in Croatia in order to prevent. So I think that now it's quite a complicated game that is played in the Western Balkans using the different sources. We were talking about the Russian assets, but we are talking also that Russia is using the Serbian infrastructure, media, political Serbian Orthodox Church to influence public opinion in the region, to control the governments in Montenegro, and to control process of European negotiation. The interest official of the Serbia is not to allow Montenegro to join before the Serbia-European Union. And now, as we are approaching closer to the European Union, that actions are becoming stronger. Serbia, once European Union was quite popular in the Serbia, now it is less than 40% of the support. Even if this is the biggest donor. Some surveys were saying that actually the European Union is not the bigger donor, but some China, Russia, or some other countries, which is completely reshaped. And that was happening during negotiation between the Serbia, done by the media under the control of Milosevic. Now, someone mentioned the high support of to the joining European Union of Montenegro. It was up to above the 80%, but now is less than 70, 12 points is the difference from the last two surveys. So what is saying, we are now witnessing very soft campaign anti-EU in Montenegro. And one part of the electorate is not pro-European oriented, because they are supporting the parties that are anti-Western. And we have to say even that some of the leaders are saying publicly that they are for EU, but sometimes it is ridiculous to follow the debate in Montenegrin parliament. Those who are really strongly against European integration, if you read what they were saying in the parliament, you know, you would be surprised, because in the stenogram everything is good. But actually they were mimicking, they were laughing, they were using irony very often. So everyone is laughing, but what is written is very positive about that. So now I'm really concerned that the media and public opinion would be used against the accession of the Montenegro in the EU. Through this model, influencing the Croatian public opinion, but also influencing and shaping Montenegrin public opinion that support to the EU is going to go down.
Thank you. Frauke, the influence, I mean, when it's so easy to change the influence, or the public opinion, it's probably related to the lack of trust, but also to the lack of understanding, knowing, to the distance. Your research into the perceptions of European citizens of the Western Balkans countries and the Western Balkan citizens of Europe. What underpins those differing perceptions that allow for, let's say, being strong anti-Europeanists and talk of things that perhaps are not really centered about what forms being a European, as we heard on the previous panel?
Yeah, thank you, Sabina, and also thanks to the Atlantic Council of Montenegro for inviting me. Sabina, you mentioned the Eurobarometer results that we recently saw published last month, with a lot of enthusiasm by the European Commission, because we saw on average we have a 56% support of EU enlargement among EU citizens. But as you already pointed out, there are some caveats. I mean, it was also very celebrated because young people were very much in favor across the board. But as you already said, in some key countries, one might argue, especially France, support is much lower. And as was already mentioned by Zlatko, is that France is one of the countries where we are likely to see a referendum. Czech Republic was mentioned. They have a very important elections today and tomorrow. And then we also see another trend, and this was alluded to a little bit, that there is a difference in the public opinion and the government rhetoric, let's say. And this is especially strong in Austria, where we have actually, among the population, much less support than in the government that is actually one of the champions, especially for Western Balkans, EU integration. And I think this is also part of a bigger picture that we see. I mean, since 2023 at least, we have this embrace of and return towards enlargement, right? Among all the EU member states, is in the Granada Declaration, all the subsequent declarations of the EU. But if we ask them, who do you want? How do you want it? When do you want them? We have completely different answers. Research has been done on this. And I think this is, of course, a really big problem. And I think when you ask about the perception, I think it's very different perception throughout the countries, throughout the different parts of the countries. And there's really a lack of strategy. Apart from the Commission, I think the Commission is working with timelines, but when it comes to the member states, there's quite a difference. And at the same time, you were alluding to the research I was doing, and you and your colleagues have been doing. I recently published something on this where I was quoting your research as well, where we see that the perceptions of belonging and of what is Europe have also really changed, especially and especially with regards to the region we are talking about, especially when we look at the period since this disengagement, or slow disengagement, at least since the financial crisis, so 2008. And subsequent disengagement, where we see that in the perception of many EU citizens and politicians, the region has gotten further away somehow in many regards. While, of course, in fact, it has much more integrated, right? Like the two regions have integrated much more, on the one hand, because of the EU accession process, trade, human contacts, right? But also, of course, because of geography, right? I mean, surrounded by EU countries, it's in the heart of Europe. So obviously, we know there is much more exchange, and yet we also see the same feeling copied or perceived in the region, especially among the young generation, where we see still a very strong support. You mentioned, apart from Serbia, for EU accession, but some upcoming research, which I had the chance to already see, also suggests that especially the young generation is saying, we want to be part of the EU, but we don't necessarily share the values. And there's, in all of the countries, I think there's less than 50% support for what is perceived as EU values, and it's more this kind of transactional understanding of what the EU membership is, and then also this lack of identification with as European. This is especially the case in Kosovo. We've, of course, seen a protracted rapprochement process, but it is true across the board. You can see some youth studies from Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, for example. So yeah, and then to your question, so indeed, how can we actually come to a common future vision if we have these growing divisions in the perception? And in the course of what we're discussing here, security and perceptions, I want to come to it from true strands, I would say. We've talked about strategic autonomy, European strategic autonomy, and I think it's a really good starting point because it's not, EU versus the rest, but or it can be, but I think at the moment we are having the conversation wrong because I've been at a lot of events recently where we've talked about what can the West and Balkans do to contribute to European security. Instead of asking how can we have better partnerships and harmonize our approaches to meet the security needs of all the countries, right? And not only of the countries, this is the second strand, also of the citizens. I think the communication has been really insufficient, the inclusion has been really insufficient when it comes to the citizens, and I think we really need to have more communication, have more inclusion, and change the narrative to a much broadened discourse. And I think one key element, and I will soon finish, but one key element I think is when we talk about burden sharing, because we have all these military expenses that are increasing, and there are a lot of suggestions, social cuts need to be made for this. But when we look at threat perceptions of the people across Europe, in the region, in my country, in the EU, we see that the biggest threat that everybody perceives is the rising living costs and housing costs. And I think we should really consider if we should put this new burden of militarization on a population that is already struggling with structural poverty, or if we shouldn't think if there is a part of the population that is also to a certain extent maybe profiting from the ongoing crisis, and where it would be a bit fairer to shift the burden a little bit in that direction. And I think it's especially a question for the youth who is now burdened with new debt. Very last point, I think it's also really important for the EU to defend the core values and to make it deliver for the people. If we look, for example, at Serbia right now, the EU has really lost its credibility with those fighting for very elemental EU values. And last sentence, I think Europeanness, the idea of Europe and Europeanness has changed throughout the centuries, throughout Europe's existence. So I think it's really on us to develop this vision together and stand up for it.
You answered my sub-question to you, where I wanted to relate to Valbona's call for listen to Draghi and act on it, because without being able to ensure the social peace, democracy and security at the same time, all of these three triangles will probably collapse. I'll go to Zlatko now. We decided to go in the reverse turn, but Frauke ate up her sub-question. So I'm going to Zlatko. If we can't rely on the media and the politicians are not stepping up, how can we build resilience of citizens and politicians, actually, on both sides, as you showed by the example of Montenegro and Croatian negotiations?
Oh, very difficult question, But I believe in the civil society actors. I believe in academia. But in some countries, just look what Serbia looks now. The protest of the Serbia. So the academia, students, civil society organization, somehow the impression is that they are alone, Yes, opposition or politicians are supporting, but there is a lack of the support from those centers that they are used to get in this similar situation, I remember 1996 when the first student protests were against Milosevic, the huge protests. The Western partners were really supportive at that time. Even that Milosevic was, let's say, the hero from the Dayton, in 1995. But there was more support. Now, somehow, this support is not really visible. And I really think that in this kind of situation, solidarity should be used, and this kind of the let's say, the actions, even that they are not supported from the traditional partners, could be very strong. But in some other countries, this is not possible. In Montenegro, we have very vibrant civil society, very influential. But on the other hand, we have very weak academia. academia is quiet on anything. It's so hard to bring someone in public to comment on something. They are really scared. And we had a similar protest in Montenegro, but without any real support from the professors to support their students, you know. So it's different scenario always, but I really believe that social actors could initiate and fight back to those tendencies that are really authoritarian that we are facing in the region very strongly.
So I understand resilience of institutions whereby the government cannot affect your, let's say, job or your position at the university if you go and protest or support students or make comments on TV. But we see that even in the US that's difficult this day, and that is also, I guess, feeding into the argument. Marjan, may I put you in the shoes of the advisor to the French President Macron?
Rather not.
For 2 minutes. How could he sell enlargement to his people who will most likely have to go to a referendum and support enlargement? There is a way to sell, uniting of Europe, but it seems that we need to somehow go further to be able to win the hearts and minds of the Europeans these days. Despite being illogical, as you say, you look at it at a map and you see just a hole in between and it's logical, but it doesn't seem to be anymore.
Well, I agree very much that we forgot people, because we are doing all what we are doing for the sake of people. And nobody in European Union never explains to the people why something is important. And today we live in very difficult world. You mentioned United States. In the morning is like this, at noon is different, and in the evening is again like it was in the morning. So it's very difficult to deal with such a politics. And the people are confused, and people are sometimes even tired of politics, like you are tired of us now. But it's people see things differently, and they don't. They just read the titles. So it's very important issue what kind of PR will we make for the people in European Union or even in Montenegro? Because people see things differently. When I come home, what have you been doing? And I try to explain something. So that's the main issue. It's unawareness. It's sometimes ignorance, and we are talking about strategic issues, about geostrategic position, but yes, as Frauke said, they are interested only in their wallet. Is it full or not? So President Macron has a lot of difficulties at home, because it's very confused politics. So Montenegro or other state can be collateral damage. It isn't connected to Montenegro or their deeds, but it's collateral damage. So that is what we must prevent. So government of Montenegro will have to be more active on persuading capitals of European Union, or even more to the people. My role as a standing rapporteur is not only to discuss with politicians or even civil society, it is also to discuss with the people of Montenegro and to tell them that when Montenegro joins European Union, there will be a lot of silly stuff, but benefits are a lot higher than the risks. So this support for joining is not unimportant. It is crucial that we maintain this leverage now as we have. So we have to deal more with the people. That's the main recipe, but how to do it is a question for $1 million.
I I think the narrative around the new multi-annual financial framework actually fits what you're saying. You might here be complaining that there's no extra money insured in it, but what the French public is getting is, it's not going to cost you anything, your farmers will be getting the money. And there is this calculation that suggests that 0.03% of GDP of the member states will be dedicated or lost because of enlargement. That's nothing, that's peanuts. So, two different messages. You will be getting enlargement support, but to the French public, it won't cost you anything. Not sure how this aligns without competitiveness increased, but somehow it should. Kenneth, last question to you. Zlatko was saying we're missing the international support for the civil society. You exposed the prominence of the foreign policy differences. Do you see opportunities in today's international situation for anyone international to step in, and other than the EU and UK, to step in?
The first thing I would say, just picking up on what the other speakers have said, is that, back in 2003, when the commitment was made for the countries of the Western Balkans to join the European Union was a very different beast to the one it is today. We've had the 2008 financial crisis and the shock waves and their significant shock waves, and to some extent we're still living with the implications of that today. And then, of course, you had Brexit in 2016. Now, Britain leaving the European Union, Britain was one of the main drivers of enlargement, there's no question. It was very much encouraging the European Union to take the line of let the Western Balkans 6 in more quickly than they subsequently have. I think Britain leaving the European Union has been a disaster for enlargement. I do think the UK has actually managed to somehow recalibrate its influence in this region, and it still matters. And what Britain can really do is through soft power. Not hard power, but through soft power, because it's what we do really well. Now, when it comes to another thing Zlatko said that was very important was civil society. I was in the States in April, and it was the same week as that the US government had announced that they were basically closing down the US Institute for Peace, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America. All of these media organizations and civil society organizations had an influence here. At least they were part of the story. Unfortunately, what's happened is that the US money's been withdrawn, and I know this has had a significant impact in Montenegro, but it's had an even more significant impact in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the situation is far more febrile and dangerous than it is in Montenegro. The removal of those funds, the fact that no European country or even the EU can step in and replace the kind of money that US aid used to spend in the region is a problem. So there's a loss there. There's going to be a loss of capacity, a loss of people who would have gone into the NGO sector or journalism that are no longer doing it. And that means there are less opportunities for those young people. And what do they do with their lives? Well, many of them will leave. And I think one thing we haven't mentioned, of course, is the brain drain and the impact that that's having on the region and will have for the continuing democratic capacity building in this region. Because what will happen to those young students in Serbia should they fail? Should this situation result actually in what appears to be a much harder line being taken by Vujovic and the Serbian Progressive Party? They didn't use violence on the streets other than potentially the use of a sonic weapon in Belgrade during the large demonstrations. But I was in Sarajevo at the time the demonstrations were going on, and I was watching one of the Vujovic TV stations that were playing over and over again leaked conversations between student leaders, and there was a banner running underneath saying these people are plotting to undermine the state, these people are criminals, and so forth. So as Zlatko said, when you have control of the media like that, and you can control the narrative, control the message, that's not a good place to be in. And because of the withdrawal of a lot of these funds, I'm afraid that the narrative to oppose that is weaker now than it was a year or 18 months ago.
Let's open the floor to the audience. We have 7.5 minutes. I see a hand here in the front. Mic, please. And light to see more hands. Thank you. I'll try to collect, so please do show me lights, show me hands, so that we collect, present yourself, and specify to whom the question is addressed. Otherwise, someone will pick it up.
Rank, name and number.
Ja sam Esat Aslani iz Ohrida, Severne Makedonije. Pitam gospodina Šarac, pošto je u Europski parlament. Rekli ste da u Makedoniji ste napravili neku grešku, što niste primili u Evropskoj zajednici. Ja mislim da ste pravili pravi put za u tim prostorima, u toj republiku ne postoji sud, ne postoji policija i ta država ne može da opstane bez sudstva i policije. Nego vi, kao Evropski parlament, treba da postavite crvena linija dok ne naprave pravi sud u Makedoniji, ne može da ide napred.
Vaše pitanje, gospodine?
Molim te ovo prašanje da se postavi u Evropski parlament.
Hvala. Do we have any other questions? I'm looking at hands up. No? Then I can continue with my questions. It's always good to feed my curiosity. Please. Kako želite?
Dobro, mogu objasniti još jednom. Nisam rekao da je bila greška da se primi Makedonija, nego da se počnu pregovori, a ti pregovori mogli bi potrajati još 10 godina, tako da to je čitav jedan proces. Tako da nismo mi napravili grešku, napravili su grešku neki pojedinci, ali nismo svi, neki smo bili na snažnom stavu da treba početi te pregovore, jer bez početka nema završetka, tako da ja stojim još uvijek na tom stavu, a slažem se, pravosuđe i to su teška pitanja.
This confirms earlier talk by the Hungarian State Secretary who said there was a strategic mistake made. I would just add there were several of them. It wasn't just one. It seems like a series of strategic mistakes, but still they were all taken in a certain context. None of them was taken in a vacuum. And talking about the futures, we're trying to get over that. Is there a way to, or let's put it this way, there were several times today allusions to change in decision-making to ensure that we can move forward. And we have on a plate this idea that the intermediate steps in enlargement negotiations could be decided by a qualified majority vote and not unanimity, whereas, according to the treaty, the very last step should still be in unanimity. And we see very diverging views of the member states for that. Frauke, any insights on that? Because Germany, and I know you know the positions, was very vocal, together with Slovenia actually, on pushing for this faster procedure. But why were then France and others afraid?
And I think just to add also a bit to what Marjan said, I think he gave us just another argument of also why this is really crucial, because it is also an opening for malign influences, because we have this practice of deciding every single step in unanimity, which is actually not a requirement in the treaties, right? I mean, you know this. We don't need to have every chapter opening according to the treaty with unanimity. So there has been an attempt, you mentioned it, by Germany and Slovenia to change the decision-making process from unanimity to qualified majority voting. I would say this has failed for different reasons. There were some countries that were against it, but there were also some countries that said, look, we want to have a discussion about, or we don't want to have a discussion about treaty reforms, and so we don't want to have this discussion just about something small like this. There has been a new attempt brought up by Antonio Costa during the recent leaders meeting. I know that in the background, let's say, the Commission is already working on changing the procedures as much as they can physically. And last part, we also saw an open letter by 4 member states, Germany, Austria, Italy, and Slovenia, which were addressing Malta costs, saying, look, we need to change the enlargement process in a way that it would deliver faster, and they will follow up on this with a non-paper. I'm not sure it's already published, maybe Zlatko already knows, but what I heard from the Commission is that there will be a non-paper, and one of the ideas is that we move bilateral disputes from like that they are referred to the Commission for their assessment whether or not they have any connection to the acquis, and if they don't have any connection to the acquis, they can then be moved to a separate body and not disrupt the enlargement process. That's an idea. I'm doubtful there will be unanimity on this, but I'm happy that there is some driving on this.
Kenneth might find this amusing. The very first veto, bilateral veto in the EU, was simple French veto against the UK joining. What if the discussion is actually not about the treaty change, but about why are you afraid of enlargement in the end? What if that is perhaps the idea? Yes.
Who is afraid of enlargement?
So you said what we now perhaps wrongly opened is a discussion about the need for a treaty change from unanimity to QMV. But what if the discussion is actually about why are you afraid of voting in favor of enlargement?
Yeah. No.
So I do see it as a possible pressure on those countries that hold others behind for reasons that are perhaps not valid or seen obvious to all of them. Kenneth, Zlatko, do you perhaps see the merit in that argument?
Well, I think in terms of further enlargement, one of the big challenges, I mean, we're kind of assuming that enlargement is going to happen without European publics taking much of an interest in it. The reality is the political situation within most Western European countries has completely changed. We've seen right-wing or populist parties come to power. They're anti-immigration. There's a pretty hostile environment in some European countries, even actually from people that were refugees coming from Bosnia or Croatia in the 1990s. The tone has changed. And while we're talking about these technical processes that are part of EU enlargement, we have to ask ourselves whether there's actually support for this among the demos in Europe, among the people. And currently, I'm not sure there is. I think we're in a worse place now than we have been for quite some time. I mean, the research probably demonstrates that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Any final thoughts that you'd like to offer? Of hope, perhaps?
The best hope was Bob Hope.
But the next best one is the 00 on the clock there. And I hope we know, so that we don't stay in that, I think a statement that from folk to friction, the last sentence was, we are at friction point here. There is no doubt about that. You're all invited to share over the reception with the panelists amongst yourselves ideas on how to persuade the French public to, and I'm saying the French as a synonym of the Europeans that have to support enlargement as well, and also, of course, how to talk to your neighbors, colleagues, friends, parents at schools, doctors, on the merits of progress in social, economic, environment, law, legal, public administration reforms to ensure not the European integration, but I guess the better future for their kids and for yourselves as well. On that positive note, I would like to say we'll continue this tomorrow. I'd like to thank you for staying here. I guess stretching of the legs is on the menu before we meet at the reception, but for this are others in charge. We here would just like to thank you very much for listening. I would like to invite you to applaud the panel. And thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.